Hi guys, White Warlock here. This is going to be the second deck guide video on the Green Steel discard deck. The first video was a little bit more short and basic on why I'm playing the deck, and this video will be on the play patterns and what choices you should make, and also a little bit about the difference of this deck versus the normal Green Steel without Prince John and with Jafar, and how the Prince John and Donald Duck that we play are like making our choices a little bit different and how you can use them. So first I'm gonna talk about the songs that you want to discard with Diablo. Obviously Diablo says discard an action card, but the only actions we play are these four songs. So yeah, basically the same. Because if you want to shift Diablo, you have to discard an action card, and most of the time that's quite an easy choice, but I'll talk about it a little bit. So my order for what I would discard are like Zeus first, then Strength, then Chill, then Storm Rage on, but this is obviously very dependent on your board state, on your opponent's board state, how many cards you have left in hand, how many cards they have left in hand, and what other cards you have on the battlefield. Let's say you have Prince John, then you really want to keep the Sun and Jill, so you can sing the Sun and Jill of Diablo and draw an additional card um, from the Bucky trigger and from the Sun and Chill. And if you don't, then the Sun and Chill becomes a little bit worse, especially if you also don't have a Earth Deceiver. And if your opponent has like 8 cards in hand, then who cares? And if your opponent has 0 cards in hand, then it does literally nothing. So sometimes you really want to kill stuff with Stormage on. That's almost always the case, but sometimes you have nothing, so then you would discard the Stormage on instead of the Sun Jail. And if you really need to kill something and your only two choices are Strength or Sun Jail, then you discard the Sun Jail and you sing the Strength to kill something if you really need to. But most of the time, you want to try to keep these and discard these. But sometimes, for example, if you have both of these, what the situation that can happen is where you need inkables. So you need to let's say you have 0 inkables and you're just shifting it, and then this and you only have these two, so you discard this one, and then you see what they discard, and then you ink the Strength, and then you play your other 3-drop or something. Um, if you have 0 inkables, that would probably be Prince John, so I would play the Prince John first in this situation, or maybe the Ursula, right? If that's the only card, then you would probably just play the Ursula. All right. And Zeus is like pretty easy almost all the time, just to discard. Like, yeah, there's not really a situation where you really need it and you can't even play it that turn. So you might just want to wait and grab your second one. It's also an inkable, so this one has the least upside. But I think the order is like this the most often discard is the least. But it obviously depends a lot on the board state. But yeah, you have to you'll just see you'll see eventually when you start playing the deck which card is the best to discard. Sometimes it's a hard decision. Almost most of the time it's pretty easy. All right, I'll talk about the best curve. So the best curve of this version, especially this version, is turn 1 Diablo, turn 2 Bucky, and then wait for the shift until turn 3. So why are we doing that? Well, against most decks, Diablo can die instantly. If you see that your opponent is playing a deck is playing with the Diablo, you're seeing them having no way to remove the Diablo, or they're playing a deck that can't really easily deal with Diablo. Think green purple, for example. Then you could maybe shift the Diablo on turn 2. Otherwise, you could I would wait for until turn 3, especially if you have a Prince John and you have no other turn 3 drop like Aladdin. Um, or well, actually, it doesn't matter because the Diablo 3. No, just wait. If you have Prince John, just wait. The extra discard and so the extra card draw you draw from the Prince John is worth the cards that you're not playing. You're not drawing from the Diablo, right? It's the same card basically. And Unless you need inkables, for example, those are the options where you just do it immediately. However, I would keep it like this. What you could also do is I'll grab a second Diablo. That's actually also an interesting thing. What you could do is you could play the Prince John. If you have two songs in your hand, let's say you have Strength and Zeus, and your opponent has two cards in their hand. For example, you can shift Diablo, discard a card with Bucky, draw a card with Prince John, and then shift another Diablo on the Diablo, so they have zero cards in hand. This is obviously very risky, and I would probably just keep the Diablo in hand for next turn. But that's something you could always do. Um, but yeah, normally I would wait until turn three to play the shift the Diablo and play something else. Obviously, if you have the Prince John, you play the Prince John first and then you shift the Diablo. If you have a card like Aladdin or Ursula, shift the Diablo first. So then you have to discard a card and then you play the Ursula. With the Aladdin, you could decide to play the Aladdin first and then play the Diablo, and hopefully they decide if you play the Aladdin first, then maybe they don't have a they don't have Diablo, so I will discard this removal card, and then you play the Diablo, and then you have to discard another card, and then you just win the game basically from that misplay from your opponent. Um, but yeah, and if you have Ursula, I would probably play the Diablo first, let them discard, and then play the Ursula. So let's say if they have two removal spells, they discard one of them, they keep the other for the Diablo, and then the Ursula survives. And next turn with Ursula, if you have a Sun Chill in your hand, you can sing Sun Chill of Ursula and basically just win the game out of no immediately, right? Um, Prince John allows you a little bit more like freedom to draw more cards and makes that waiting one turn um, basically neutral versus like drawing one less card if the Diablo would have survived. But for the others, it's more that you give your opponents two threats at the same time, which is harder for them to deal with. So they have to decide, all right, do I want to take Diablo or the Ursula or the Aladdin? Especially if they've seen your hand or something, like you play a mirror and you have Diablo, Ursula on the play on turn three, and they play like turn two Bucker or something. They have to decide, okay, what the hell am I gonna do now? Um, if I keep the Ursula alive, then I sing Sun and Chill and suddenly I have zero cards in my hand, and I only have a Bucky and they have Diablo Ursula or something, or they don't have, or maybe I can kill the Diablo, but then you have the Ursula, and then what if they draw a storm so that they can sing Storm on their own Ursula, for example, draw two cards, or even on one of their characters. So um, yeah, it gives your opponent more threats to deal with, and that's for most of the time more important than drawing that one extra card. Um, Especially if you know that your opponent can deal with it. Um, yeah, so it's more important, and also against most decks, and this is not obviously all the time, your opponent will have less cards in hand on turn three than they do on turn two. Obviously, against some decks, if you're on the draw and they play turn three, um, friends on their side or something, then they don't. But if you're on the play, or even on the draw against like a blue steel deck and they play turn three Fishbone Quill or something, then they have way less cards in hand than they would if you make them discard immediately. So um, it kind of matters a little bit, but I would say to keep it on turn three, the Diablo, and be wary of questing. If you're not playing against a red deck, then you can almost always quest, unless your opponent has a character that can kill the Diablo, obviously. Um, but yeah, I would say keep it on turn three, and play both threats at the same time. That's the easiest way. Obviously, if you don't have any turn three play at all, then maybe you shift on turn two and hopefully you draw, and then hope that you draw the turn three play, because you do have a lot of turn three plays obviously in this deck. So with the Prince John, you have two more than the normal version has, so it has it has good uses. uh, so I would say that that is a reasonable play to make if you have no turn three play, to just shift on turn two and sure it dies, but at least you draw one card, right? All right, and then for the final four cards, um, so the Vermin Hood package is for if you don't have the Diablo. It's a fine play for turn one Robin Hood, turn two Bucky, turn three Shift Robin Hood against most decks. That's really good. Just a small reminder that this is just a good play. Keep this in hand. If this is your hand, let's say the other four are strict mulligans, then just keep this in hand, right? So yeah, this is just a very good play against almost every deck, uh, and especially in this meta. So just keep that in mind. Then Ursula, I want to talk about Ursula a little bit because I've seen a lot of people play the Ursula too early or too late. And so for the too early people, most of the time you really only want to play the Ursula Deceiver on the turn before your opponent can play the Be Prepared or the Whole New World or whatever. Um, that's where you're using Ursula for. Sometimes against Green Steel, you might want to play it as early as possible, except on turn two, obviously, if you have a Bucky. But you might not have the room or the ability to do so. Let's say you have a turn three, you have a turn three play, you want to play the big Ursula, or the three cost Ursula, and then maybe on turn four you can play another second Bucky plus Ursula. That's okay, but don't play it on turn three and just waste your turn three not really developing a threat. And against other decks, keep it for the turn before your opponent can do it. So let's say you're playing as red purple, your opponent is at 5 ink, don't play it yet. If your opponent is at 6 ink, then you can play it. If your opponent is at 7 ink, you're too late. So make sure you play it when your opponent has 6 ink, so he can go to 7. Unless your opponent has 0 cards in hand, obviously, but then you don't need the Ursula anyways, right? And then finally, Donald Duck. We play Donald Duck, and especially with cards with Prince John, this card is really interesting because it allows your opponent to make a lot of misplays, which um, the normal version also has. Obviously, with discarding, a lot of people make misplays with discarding the wrong card. But drawing a card with Donald Duck seems like the best play basically all the time. But with Prince John out, that it's not always the case, or almost always not the case, not to draw the card. If your opponent has 0 cards in hand and I have like 3, then you should never draw a card with Donald Duck because I draw one, you draw one. I play a Flopborn because I have Bucky lying around. You have to discard your one card. I draw another card of Prince John, right? So then the Donald Duck just gives me 2 cards every turn for free, and that's too much. Just note that sometimes you can, if you don't think you would really need that extra card, you can just quest with it, and sometimes your opponent doesn't want it dead because they have the false hope that their cards will stay in their hand, so they want to draw the cards with Donald Duck, and then if you have enough cards in your hand to discard them with Bucky or Sudden Jail or like abuse Prince John with it, then you can really punish your opponent, and that's something why I really like Donald Duck, and it's just a better. It's an interesting turn four play versus the Jafar line, right? The turn four Jafar, they're both flopborns. I like Donald Duck better. Jafar is probably a little bit of a better card. Um, but yeah, I really like playing with Donald Duck, especially with Prince John. So make sure to play around it. Obviously, if your opponent has a lot of cards in their hand already, then Donald Duck becomes much worse because the chance that you can abuse the Prince John, Bucky, and Donald Duck combination um, is a lot lower, and you just give your opponent a free card every turn. So if you have like a different plays on turn four, or you draw Donald Duck later on, and you have different plays on turn five, like Robin Hood or Beast, then you should probably ink it. Um, and if you have two, you should probably ink one because two of them is very hard to deal with for you to get rid of 2 cards every turn. Unless you're at such a high ink, then that it doesn't really matter anymore. So yeah, be careful for that. All right, that's basically every play pattern I wanted to discuss. My next video will be a bit longer on the mulligan, and I will make maybe a third video again, or well, fourth video today, playtesting some mulligans as well. Uh, All right, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.